Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Michael Malondo, and I'm going to present on the subject of ethics for HIV/AIDS management, ETH0S3, for the standalone program. The purpose of this presentation is to prepare you for the exam, and then also to inform you what is expected from you during the exam. I'm going to present this subject, or this presentation is divided into two sections. The first section is the preparation for your exam paper. What do you need to do as part of your preparation before the exam, and then also during the exam. The second section of this presentation will then look at the content of the subject and what is expected from you. But as we say to all of you, most students, it's advisable that you need to know the whole content of the subject from the beginning to the end, and not just focus on this presentation alone. So to start with, I'm first going to give you some practical tips and advice which I get from the experience I had with students preparing for exam paper. And many students, they make this mistake when they go and write exam. The reason why they fail is because they don't prepare themselves. And it's very important to prepare yourself for any examination, especially for the upcoming exam in May. So the first thing that you have to do is you have to give yourself 2 months before you're going to write the exam. At least some people prefer a month just to prepare yourself. And what you have to do is to come up with a timetable. Your book or your subject is having 10 or 15 chapters. You divide those chapters into a period of 2 months, which is 8 weeks. You can have 2 chapters or 3 chapters a week, or 1 chapter a week. It all depends on you. So at least you need to make sure that you've got a timetable. And based on your timetable, then there's 3 things that you have to do. The first one is you have to read the chapters. Read the chapters, and the reason of reading the chapters is you want to understand the content and the context of the subject itself. So make sure that you read. And while you are reading your chapter, as part of your preparation, then you have to make notes. Underline words, concept words, key words, concepts that you don't understand. Make a circle around it, and then if you have additional notes, make notes on that study manual. You can also even have an extra book to make study or to make notes. Very important that you have to, because these notes that you are making during your preparation is very needed, because when you are going to end up doing a revision, say a week before the exam or so, then you go through your notes and it will help you a lot. Then after making the notes, it's very important, and you have to revise what you have write down and what you have studied as part of your revision. Very important is, do not try to study the day before you write the exam subject. Make sure at least the day before you write that you have rested and that you have refreshed yourself. Very, very important, because your brain works like a computer. You actually store the information, and when you need the information, you retrieve it, and that's the same thing with your brain. It stores up all the information that you have studied, and it will always store it and make sure that you will use it. So during the exam, it's very important that when you have the exam paper in front of you, that you have to read through the questions. The reason why is you first need to identify the questions that's the easiest. Because when you read those through all the 6 questions, you identify the question that's the easiest, then you will start with those questions that's easier. Mistake many students are doing, they start with a question that's very difficult. At the end of the day, they waste much time spending time on the difficult question, and by the time they come to the easiest question, then the time is limited. So always start with the easiest question. And then also, very important, write very neatly the question number. When you do numbering of the questions, make sure that you number them very clearly, and everybody can see it. So after you have selected the question, then thirdly what you have to do is to read through the question to understand the question. The reason why is many people, when they select a question which is easier for them, they answer the question which they think is the answer. So it's very important when you understand the question, then you will be able to answer the question. So don't interpret the question or try to decode the question or assume this is what the question is. Read the question in order to understand, in order to answer the question. So these are the practical tools which are very important for you to prepare yourself for your exam and to make sure that you are ready for the exam. So we're quickly going to go through the content of the subject. The first thing that you have to look at is you need to understand ethics. What is ethics? You have to define ethic as a what. Then you have to give different examples of ethics. When people talk about ethics, and this is also very good when you're going to look at different worldviews, different philosophy, different perspective on what ethic is, the definition of ethics. So I will suggest that you go read your manual, go to the library, go to the internet to research to understand what the concept ethics mean. Then secondly is morals. You look at different moral, you look at behavior, what are moral, what constitute as morals. How do you link ethics with morals? This is also something that you have to look at, which is very important. There is a very slight distinction, but the two, moral and ethics, are so linked, and you must be able to explain the linkages of these two words and why is ethic and moral so important, especially when it comes to human behavior. Why do certain people behave in certain way? Why do certain people do certain things? Why do they say it? So there needs to be some ethical principles for you that to abide to ensure that you have the right morals that you are actually exercising. So it's very important that you have to understand and to explain the difference about the two, the ethics and the morality or the morals. So secondly, then you're going to look at the whole philosophy. And as I said, ethics, this subject is based on different philosophy, the Western philosophy and then also the Eastern philosophy. So I will encourage you to read the philosophy of both two spectrums or two world views, the Western philosophy and then also the Eastern philosophy, because it will help you that when you're going to write your exam, that you have a better understanding and a comprehensive or a holistic understanding of what philosophy is all about and then also what ethics is all about. So when you look at the mind and you look at logic, is the mind and logic, is it the same thing or is it something different? What makes a logic? What you are thinking right now, is that logic or is it illogical? So these are the aspects that you have to look at. What does this philosophy? So you have to be able to understand the concept of this philosophy. What does this philosophy mean? You have to be able to define this philosophy. Then give practical examples on this philosophy, on mind and logic. What does it mean? Give a practical example, daily life examples. So I will suggest that you have to look into this in detail to have a better understanding what this philosophy is all about. Then you've got epistemology, which is also another concept. We have covered this also in the part, and especially when you do research and look at what we call the paradigm of research. Now, epistemology and metaphysics are two different paradigms or two different mindsets when it comes to ethics. Now, epistemology is a paradigm that's been used so many times in research, especially when it comes to qualitative type of research where you are talking to someone from face to face. So this is very important that you need to know what is epistemology. Why is it very important in ethical or in ethics? Why do people have this kind of paradigm or this mindset? how does it work, what are the challenges of epistemology, and how can you use epistemological worldview in order to apply to specific philosophy or a specific activity. Epistemology can also be a type of philosophy. As I say, it all depends on your school of thought. So you can make it a mindset, you can make it a paradigm, you can make it a philosophy, you can make it a worldview. It's very important. What are the difference between epistemology and metaphysics? So you have to compare the two, which are very important in preparation for your exam. Now, there are different philosophies or different principles in ethics. There is plus minus 7 to 8 principles that you can apply when it comes to principle. For example, the principle of confidentiality, the principle of privacy, the principle of respect, principle of non-maleficency, the principle of confidentiality. So these are something. Now, when it comes to non-maleficence, we've covered this so many times. You have to look at it's a principle which is being applied so many times, especially when it comes to research. This is one of the things, principle that's very much important when you're going to do research. That you have to apply this principle. So we have covered it. It's in your study guide. You have to go read through it, look at the internet, go to your library, and look at what non-maleficence actually mean, and how this principle is very important when it comes to ethics. The other thing is confidentiality. We have talked so many times about confidentiality, especially when it comes to counseling. In counseling, you have two people. You've got the counselor, and then you've got the client. Now, the client confide in the counselor and expecting the counselor to respect and to keep whatever they're going to discuss in confidence, and then also to keep that secret. Now, the question is, how do you as a counselor apply the principle of confidentiality to make sure that you keep the confidence, whatever has been discussed in the counseling session will be kept secret. So in your discussion and in your paper, you have to explain in detail what is confidentiality, what are the principles, what are the advantages of this confidentiality, what do you do when confidentiality has been broken or when you have breach of confidentiality, how do you address it, for an example. So these are some of the things which you have to look at as a student, and you have to know and to explain it in detail how you're going to apply it when it comes to ethics. Confidentiality, there's a lot of misconception about confidentiality, especially when it comes to a third party. What do you do if you say that you are a counselor and you have this privilege of confidentiality, and you discuss in confidence this case with a third party, like with a colleague, just to get advice. So there is a very thin line when it comes to third party confidentiality and breach of confidentiality, especially in an issue where you've got a doctor-patient confidentiality or privileges. So it's very important that in your discussion, you have to give detail, you have to give the background, you have to look at all different dimension of this word confidentiality in order to give a better perspective, especially in the examination. Then, of course, we've talked, when I started with ethics, I talked about ethics and moral, and I mentioned about behavior. So you have to look at the different, what we call ethics and moral behavior systems. We've talked about this also in the past, in previous presentation. You have to look at different systems like the integrated behavioral systems. You have to look at different models that are being used, especially, and you can also look at different psychological theories they are using when it comes to behavior systems. You can also look at different models that are being prescribed and how this is very important. So every system or model when it comes to behavior different from its context or from its environment. So it's for you very important to know that when you are going to apply this, you have to explain them in detail how you're going to apply this behavioral system. So discuss it in detail, the systems. You can discuss it also in detail, the models that you can apply and how that's very important. But you cannot answer this question if you don't understand the different systems that are available or the models that are available for moral behavior system. At the end, your morality or morals actually influence people's behavior. You can either have a moral behavior or an immoral behavior. So what makes your behavior moral? So in basic language, we can call it acceptable or unacceptable behavior. So this is something that you have to look at. Another ethical principle which is very important that you also need to look at and to understand is informed consent. If I am going to write a book about you, for example, I cannot just write the book and publish it. I need to come to you and inform you about the book that I'm going to write about your life. Then when you after I've informed you, then you need to give me then permission to say, okay, I give you permission that you can write this book and publish this book. And this is what we call informed consent. Consent only means that I give you permission. Now, when it comes to writing books or writing an article in a newspaper about someone, where do you draw the line? What are the ethical principles when it comes to informed consent? Do you have permission to write about that person or to publish about that person? Very important. For example, how do you link confidentiality with informed consent? If I'm going to counsel you and you give me a consent or permission that I can talk about you in a classroom or in a session where I'm talking to other people. So it's very important. And even in informed consent, you also find a situation where you have a written permission. And written permission is very important in the sense that you find some people that they only give verbal consent or verbal permission, but they don't actually give written permission. So it's very important for you to do that. Excuse me. So informed consent is very important, that you need to make sure that it's been written, just to give a record of the patient or the client as part of your ethical respect or principle that you adhere to. Then the other thing that you have to look at is the Asian ethical path. Now, the Asian ethical path is based on the Asian philosophical point of view. We've also talked about that. There are certain ethical principles that the Asian philosophy actually adhere or actually condone. Very important. So remember, as I've said earlier in previous presentation, there are two types of philosophical point of view, two philosophy. There is the Western philosophy and there is the Eastern philosophy. So it's very important that when you are going to discuss this, you have to look at this. The same also with the ancient Indian philosophy. It's also based on the Asian philosophy. So make sure that in your preparation for this examination, you have a very good and a comprehensive understanding on the Western philosophy and the Eastern philosophy. The Eastern philosophy entails both the Asian ethical path and the ancient Indian philosophers. There are many philosophers. A very good philosopher that we have is the philosophy of non-violence, the philosophy of peace. And we know one of the famous politician or person in India is Gandhi, who actually practiced the ancient Indian philosophy, which believe in non-violence. So how do you use those different kinds of philosophy in practical? And in your exam, when you are going to write about this philosophy, make sure that you give practical examples, because it won't help then you just give theories, you just explain the philosophy, but you don't give practical examples. So it's very important that in your discussion you have to talk about it. And then we've got the medieval philosophy of philosophers. Now remember, in previous presentation we've also talked about the medieval philosophy, looking at the different philosophy that are there and how that philosophies are linked to modern philosophy. So many of our philosophy that we find today in the modern time is actually started. And then you can look at philosophies like Plato, Socrates. You can look at different Aquinas, different philosophies that were there, the Greek philosophers, the Roman philosophers, for example. Very good example that you can use. And as you're going to discuss those different philosophy, you will find out that it does make sense when it comes to ethics and ethical principle. So in your discussion or in your paper, when you are going to write this, it's very important that you differentiate those different philosophy and then also give practical example. The other thing is then fairness in scaling up HIV care. And fairness is actually linked to stigma discrimination. How fair are you going to be when you are going to when you're giving care to somebody that's HIV positive or to a chronic patient? So the principle of fairness is very important, and in your discussion you have to make sure, in your paper, that you have to make sure that you discuss the principle of fairness and how do you apply that principle of fairness to HIV care, and especially for those that are infected and affected by HIV/AIDS. So I hope that you have a better understanding of what you have to do in your preparation for your exams, and I wish you all the best for your preparation, and good luck. Thank you for listening to me.